Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about the 8 books that I read around March-April time. I'm again going to apologise for the awful background, it's so beige in here, and if the lighting goes in and out, I'm sat in front of my window right now, so it's a pretty cloudy day. If it goes all of a sudden really bright then cloudy, then you'll know why. We are in May in England, but honestly you wouldn't even know. This is the first day in weeks that it's not actually rained, so yeah. So the first book that I read was The Running Man by Richard Bachman, otherwise known as Stephen King. That's one of the pseudonyms that he's written under. I have read 2 of Stephen King's other books before. I've read Misery and I've read Pet Sematary. I did enjoy those books, but I do think they're a bit overrated. I don't understand all the hype that I've seen online about those books, to be honest, so I thought I would give another genre of his a go, and I picked up this dystopian thriller, The Running Man. It was written in like the 80s, I think, and it's set in 2025 in a totalitarian dystopia where our main character Ben lives with his wife and their child. Ben has been blacklisted from working in his trade. His wife has had to resort to prostitution in order to pay for the family, and their child is really ill and is basically going to die if she doesn't receive urgent medical treatment that they cannot afford. So in his desperation, Ben goes to the government-run television station where they air really violent game shows where people participate in the hopes that they will win a lot of money. It's basically the more violence and humiliation you can withstand, the more money that you will potentially win. Ben goes through all these rigorous tests, like physical and mental tests, and he is picked to go on The Running Man. Basically, you are declared an enemy of the state. You have 12 hours head start to go anywhere in the world on the run, and then these professional trained, I think they're called hunters, will pursue you, come after you and publicly execute you on television. And it sounds like a really scary situation. It kind of reminded me of like Black Mirror, the episode that's like 15 Million Merits, and a bit like Hunted, which is a TV show in the UK. That's the premise. The premise sounds great. The premise is the best thing about this book, in all honesty. I didn't really like Ben from the start and he didn't get much more likeable throughout. And that meant that I just didn't really root for him as much as I wanted to or felt like I should have done. I felt that there was some racist and sexist overtones in this book that leave a bad taste in your mouth when you're reading them in 2021. A lot of the humour in this book seemed to just go over my head. Yeah, unfortunately I just didn't really care for Ben. I think in a story like this where you're following one person on the run, you sort of need to root for them. I ended up giving this, I think, what did I give it? I ended up giving it like a 2.5. I think I'm gonna, when it's like Halloween time, October, I'm gonna try and read some of his short horror stories because I seem to really like his concepts and his ideas, but I just don't like the writing very much. So I feel like if I try a short story then I might like it a bit better. Next up was a book that I gave 5 out of 5, and it was Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. You might have heard about this book because it was recently adapted into a Netflix show. I didn't read it because of that, it was just a coincidence. It is a thriller, mystery thriller, about this woman called Louise who is a single mom. She's in a bit of a rut, and one night she goes out to a bar, she meets a man, they hit it off, they kiss, and then he quickly leaves and she thinks, okay, maybe he's married or something because that was weird, he's not getting back to me, whatever. Then she goes into work one day and she finds that this man who she kissed in the bar is her new boss. And yes, he was married. So if it wasn't awkward enough that Louise has kissed her new boss, she then starts to become friends with his wife, and his wife is very clear that her husband could not know about the two of them being friends. So she's sort of got these secret relationships with both David and Adele, I think they're called. But I really don't want to say anything more than that because it would just give away everything. But I was enjoying this thriller, and then it got to the end and I was just blown away. I loved the ending. I've heard that it's a little bit hit or miss for some people. Some people really don't like it. I loved it. I thought it was so good. It was creepy, like I was actually creeped out to my core. Couldn't stop thinking about this book for like days, weeks after I read it. I really liked the direction that it took, and I wouldn't have predicted it whatsoever. As I was reading it, I was constantly full of questions. I didn't know who to trust, and then when it gets to the ending and everything comes together, it all pieces together so well. So yeah, I would highly recommend that if you are a fan of the unexpected and you like being surprised and shocked by an ending. Next up is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I finished this book about 2 months ago and I've only just sort of decided if I liked it or not. I ended up giving this a 1 out of 5, which I feel kind of bad for because my best friend recommended this book to me. It's not something I would normally pick up. I do like fantasy occasionally, but it's not really a genre that I gravitate towards, and I don't think I would have picked this up having just read the summary. All the reviews are absolutely glowing. It's got like a 4.5 average or something like that. It also won the Goodreads 2020 People Choice Award, so like it was voted the best. I thought it was voted the best fantasy, however it was actually voted the best romance, which says a lot about this book. It was essentially a romance masquerading as a fantasy. Basically, I'm not really going to try and summarise the plot because if you read the Goodreads synopsis, there's a lot of fantasy, queen, king talk, ruling the kingdom, blah blah blah, etc. There's basically this girl called Poppy who is the maiden. She is perfect, prim, proper, but really she just wants to go and fight with the guards, and she's an expert fighter as well. And then she meets Hawk, who is this absolutely stunning, beautiful, wonderful man who has 0 flaws whatsoever. I feel like he had little purpose other than to make readers swoon over him. This book is actually quite long and it took me a really long time to get into it. At about halfway, I started warming to Hawk and Poppy's romance. There was a lot of banter there, there was a lot of sexual tension, and then as I got to the end, it started getting very Twilighty. Can I just say that all the fantasy elements in this book are really not for me. I feel like nothing was really original. The world building was just not there. I can't remember anything about like the fantasy world, you know, like the lore and everything behind it. I don't feel like there was really anything other than just like regurgitated old stuff about like werewolves and vampires just called a different thing. And also, I'm gonna put a little thing here for like mild spoilers and like skip ahead if you don't want to know about this, but that Hawk character was the most arrogant arsehole ever. He basically manipulated Poppy. Like, Poppy's insufferable too, but he manipulated her into like falling in love with him even though he's meant to be like her enemy or whatever. That's kind of messed up. And then like afterwards, when she's obviously pissed off about this, he like basically takes the piss out of her for it and is just like, well, you were too busy thinking about me and blah 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 blah. And it just made me feel a bit sick, and I really didn't like him by the end of it. And I was just like, I cannot stomach reading a second and third book about these two and this messed up romance when the whole book is basically about their romance. There's no fantasy to it. There's like anything that was exciting that was mildly fantasy related was just completely ignored. Like at the very start, this woman is killed by potentially a paranormal creature. It doesn't get mentioned for another like 200 pages. So like when I finished it, I think I gave it like a 3 because I was like, okay, I could potentially read the second one. And then as time has gone on, I've sort of realised, no, that is not for me, and I will definitely not read the other 2 books. Or I think that there might even be more books in the series, I don't know. But I do feel really bad for my friend because she really enjoyed this book and I really didn't. I've seen a couple of really scathing reviews about this book, but predominantly I've seen really good reviews. So I think if you're a fan of Twilight, I feel like you might like this series because it is sort of like a romancy, forbidden romance type thing with a bit of fantasy in there. So you might like it. Next up, I read Bad Mummy by Tarryn Fisher, but it's like American, so it's mommy, which obviously is not how I would say that word, but yes, so I picked this up because I really like Tarryn Fisher. I've read 2 of her books before. I've read Marrow and I've read The Wives. I think I gave The Wives 5 out of 5 because of the ending. This one I was a bit underwhelmed with. It follows this character called Fig, who becomes obsessed with this woman and her daughter, and she gets super jealous. She sort of thinks that this daughter should be hers instead. So when the opportunity arises, she buys the house next door to this family in the hopes that she can infiltrate this family and eventually replace the mum, I guess. I really liked this book at the start. I liked Fig's sort of stalkerish, obsessive personality, and she was really messed up, and I liked reading from her perspective. I soon started finding her really grating and really irritating, so thank God the perspectives change. I think there's 3 perspectives, like told in 3 sections. You got to see insights into the other characters who she was like creeping on. I don't know, it just felt a bit flat. I think I was expecting this mega twist, having read 2 of her books before and there being like twists in there. I think I was just expecting something a bit more, so when it got to the end I was just like, oh, is that it? That's all I've really got to say about it. I can't remember a lot of what happened. It all just fell a bit flat, so yeah, that's a shame. Though I will read more of her books because one out of 3 isn't a bad track record, to be honest. Next up, I read the Roanoke or Roanoke Girls by Amy Engel, and this one is a really dark, disturbing mystery story. I'm going to say Roanoke, but sorry if that's wrong. The Roanoke girls are part of this family, the Roanokes obviously, and they're all really beautiful, they're all really rich, they lived on this really lovely like farm sort of estate, and everyone in this small town was really jealous of them, but they're all hiding this really dark family secret. All of their lives have been really tragic. They've either run away or they've died in mysterious circumstances, mainly at a very young age. So our main character is called Lane Roanoke. She's 15. Her mum, who she lives with, has just committed suicide, so Lane is sent to go and live with her maternal grandparents on this estate where they all originated from. Lane has never been there herself because her mum did run away, so she goes to spend this summer with her grandparents and her cousin Allegra. Things just don't seem quite right. Years later, she gets a call from her grandfather who says that Allegra's gone missing, so she returns to this estate to uncover the full truth about her family history and also find out what happened to her cousin. Hope that all made sense. I liked the writing style for this book. I liked how it was told from the perspective of Lane in the past, in the summer when she stayed there when she was 15, and then in the present day when she's now gone back and looking for Allegra. And then we also get some brief chapters from the other Roanoke girls who have died. Only like really short chapters which were all really hard hitting. I would be warned about going into reading this book. It does handle like really dark subject matter. I will put a trigger warning in my description box if you want to look at that, because it does sort of spoil the story. However, it is revealed very early on, so I don't know. If you want to go in blind, you can go in blind. If you want to look at my description box for a trigger warning, you can do that as well. So yeah, and I think the way that it handled the subject matter was really sensitive, and it wasn't like exploitative or anything, but it was really upsetting. It talked a lot about how the girls were manipulated and their emotions were played with and things like that. So it explored issues that aren't often brought up in books about this topic, I think. So yeah, I really liked this book. My only criticism is that I wasn't entirely convinced by the ending, but that didn't really spoil my enjoyment of this book. I also liked the little romance that was going on, because normally I don't really care for them, but I enjoyed the romance in this book. Yeah, I think it's definitely worth a read. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. Would recommend that if that sounds like something that you'll be interested in. Oh, the last 3 books, I actually own them, finally. So, Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. I'm still not entirely sure how to say that name, unfortunately. This book was really good. I gave it 4 out of 5. It's about a Chinese American family living in Ohio in the 1970s, and their favourite daughter, the middle child, Lydia, has just died, and it's a story about how they deal with their grief and their loss. It really goes into depth about this family and about the dynamics going on here. It talked about like sibling rivalry and parents pushing their attitudes onto children. It looks into how things that your parents do can really shape you as a person, how the smallest little comment can stay with people for a long time. I also thought that the author did a really good job of making me understand exactly why each character did certain things. So even if they had an attitude or an opinion, or they did something that I didn't agree with, I completely understood why that character did that or thought that way or whatever. So I feel like all the characters were really fully realised, they were very real, and yeah. And this book is so short, like really, it's barely 300 pages and there's so much in here to unpack. And not to mention, it's obviously very sad because at the end of the day it's about a teenage girl who's died. So although there's sort of mystery elements to it about how and why, but I wouldn't say it's like a thriller or anything like that. It's definitely more of a contemporary fiction with mystery elements to it. And also the fact that this family are Chinese American, it talks a lot about the experience of being mixed race, which I found really interesting. The experience of like otherness, or the family feeling cultural differences with the rest of society, or even within the family, because the dad of the family is Chinese, the mum is American, so they've got cultural differences between them. I don't know, it just had a lot, it touched on a lot of issues in a really good way, while still being a really good story as well. So I do highly recommend this book. The only reason I didn't give it a 5 was because I didn't cry when I thought I should have, or thought I would have cried. I don't know, I just feel like if this book would have made me cry, it would have like pushed it into the 5-star territory, but yeah, it did not, so I'll leave it at a 4 for now. Next up, I read Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This is a modern science fiction classic. Let's see, it won the Hugo Award and the Nebula Award. I really love this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It made me bawl my eyes out. It was so sad. This book is about a guy called Charlie Gordon who has severe learning disabilities. I guess he's like classed as mentally disabled, and he really strives to improve his intelligence. He goes to classes trying to learn how to read and write, and one day he is approached by a group of scientists who have just done this experiment on this mouse called Algernon, and they've managed to increase Algernon's intelligence so that he can now complete mazes really quickly. In general, they've been able to see a boost in this mouse's intelligence, so they want to test it on a human subject, and Charlie does volunteer for this task. So they perform this operation on him and Charlie's IQ starts soaring up. We're basically following Charlie through like his diary entries as he becomes more intelligent. Also, as he starts to realise that the effects of this surgery might have other side effects, they might have more risks attached to it, and they might not be a permanent lasting effect. This book touches a lot on the experiences of people with learning difficulties, how they are often misunderstood, ostracised from society, the butt of jokes, often bullied. Even the people that are closest to them, such as a family, want them to be normal rather than accepting them for who they are. And also Charlie, like, he wants more for himself. He doesn't accept who he is. It also talks about people that are just kind of shunted into these homes for mentally disabled people. Their family abandon them, they don't have anyone around them, and yeah, it was really, really sad. There was a lot of talk about intelligence in general and the importance of intelligence, what like the different levels of intelligence that people can have and which ones are more important for essentially being a human and building relationships with other people. I really liked learning about Charlie's relationships, how they changed throughout the book, and when it got to the end I was bawling my eyes out. I was hysterically crying. I couldn't breathe. Like, this book hit me so hard. I love a book that makes me cry. I just feel like it really puts it in like a 5 out of 5 zone where it's affected me so much. It's had a lasting impression on me, and this book definitely did. So if that sounds like something that you would enjoy, then please read this book, but you might also cry, so be prepared. Lastly, I have another 5 out of 5. This is The Memory Wood by Sam Lloyd, and this is a mystery thriller about the Memory Wood. It's a really secluded and isolated place. There's this boy called Elijah who lives there, and he's lived there his whole life. He's really lonely though, and then this girl called Alyssa shows up, and he's really excited because he can finally have a new friend in the Memory Wood. But Alyssa is trying to escape, whereas Elijah's trying to keep her there. It's sort of like a cat and mouse kind of story. I really liked how this story was told. We follow the perspectives of Elijah, also Alyssa, who has been abducted and taken to the Memory Wood against her will. We're also following a detective who is investigating her disappearance. This book was super action-packed. It kept me hooked right from the get-go. I also think it was just really well written, especially for a thriller, where I think that just pure good writing isn't always what matters for a thriller. As long as the twists and turns are good, that can sometimes be enough, but this had everything in it. The description of the Memory Wood at the start of the book was so vivid and atmospheric and beautiful that I could just picture it right in front of me, and I felt like I was there. It also had a lot of insight into how detectives investigate abductions. I feel like the author must have done their research or had some sort of insight or whatever, because it was really detailed. I read the final half of this book in one sitting, one morning in bed. I literally couldn't put it down. I couldn't get up. I was in bed till like dinner time just reading this book. There was so much suspense in this book. I didn't know who to trust half the time. I finished this book feeling like I'd been truly manipulated by the author, and I love thrillers that really turn something on its head and make you realise that what you've been reading isn't what you first thought it was. My only criticism is that I finished it and there was a couple of niggling questions that I had in my head that I would have liked further clarification on, but it wasn't anything major. But I did give this one a 5 out of 5 because I give a lot of thrillers 4 out of 5, and I wanted this one to stand out on my Goodreads shelves as something that stood out to me personally, even though I don't think it's like a perfect book, but it's definitely one of the best that I have ever read. So yeah, I would highly recommend this one. So that's all the books that I read in around March and April time. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you for watching. If you could give this video a like and subscribe, that would mean the world to me. And yeah, I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.